Coming to you from the greatest city in the world, this is the #1 showbiz podcast. It's Talk for Two. Here's your host, Matt Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Gary Owen. You know, everybody, he and I had a fantastic conversation last week, and there is not a nicer, more helpful guy around. So thank you, Gary, for everything, including letting me use your voice every week. This is fantastic. I really appreciate it. Welcome into another episode of Talk for Two, and thank you to our season sponsors, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. TangentBoundNetwork.com has over 100 podcasts for you to listen to, not just our show, but a ton of other podcasts in a ton of other genres. Mark, the guy who runs it, I also talked with him at length last week. I've been working on some stuff with some of my mentors, and Gary and Mark, I'm proud and happy to say, are steering me in the right direction. And this show, it would not be where it is without those two. So please check out tangentboundnetwork.com because Mark does this out of the goodness of his heart, and he loves when you listen. And Axtel.com. Talk about another mentor in Steve Axtel. He's another reason this show is where it is today. Now, next week, it'll have been about a month, if you can believe it, since we were all together at CAX. And if you miss CAX, you got to go to Axtel.com to find out what you missed in terms of new products, because Steve's got a lot of new goodies for all of you out there who listen and who are into puppets and magic. So go ahead, Axtel.com, and maybe you'll be able to find out how you can join us in California next week. It's the end of January, and it's warm. You can't go wrong. Now, the show today gets personal for me and very cool for you guys. My guest is J.C. Lee, a writer and producer on a little show called How to Get Away with Murder. Lee wrote the spring premiere of the ABC hit drama. He is also a graduate of the Julliard School and has had his work produced at the Lincoln Center. But before he became one of this generation's most prolific theater and TV writers, he taught at my high school. That's right. Actually, towards the end, we delve into a story that Lehigh Valley Charter High School for the Arts students, alumni, and staff are sure to love, especially all of you in the theater department, past, present, and maybe even future. If you find this and you Google Lehigh Valley Charter High School for the Arts and this pops up, you'll get to hear this story about Chris Morris and a shoe. Here now to tell us why only 15 episodes per season is both a blessing and a curse, our interview with J.C. Lee. J.C. Lee, welcome to Talk for Two. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. This is both a blast from the past and so excited to see what you've been up to lately. You are a writer and a co-producer on How to Get Away with Murder, but we'll get to that. But I want to begin at the beginning. How'd you get started in writing, playwriting and screenwriting?
Basically, I was an actor originally. I was an actor. I did a bunch of improv stuff. I did a lot of Shakespeare stuff while I was in school. And then there was just one summer where a group of friends of ours wanted to put on a play, and we couldn't figure out a play to put on. Mm-hmm. And someone was sort of like, hey, why don't you write something for us to do? And so I did. And then that play sort of went on and went to a bunch of college theater festivals and won a couple of awards. And I sort of realized that being a writer was just easier than being an actor or a performer. It's just an easier, for me personally, it was an easier thing to do. And so I segued into writing and directing plays primarily. And then from there just became a playwright.
That's wonderful. Now, you studied at the Julliard School. What was your concentration? I want to say major, but I'm not sure if that's the right term. What did you study at Julliard?
I was a playwright at Julliard.
Oh.
I was one of the 4 people they pick annually, 4 to 5 people they pick annually to be in the Lila Etchison Wallace American Playwrights Program. It's a program run by Marcia Norman and Christopher Durang.
Wow.
And it's a 2 to 3 year program, if you survive. And it's amazing. It's an incredible program. I would recommend it to anyone.
Now, did you study writing elsewhere? Was there some place you did for undergraduate, or was that your only college experience? Was those 2 years at Julliard?
Juilliard was grad school. I did my undergraduate work in English and education and theater at Bloomsburg University in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania.
Wow, and that brings me to the next thing is after all of that, you became a teacher at my high school, LVPA, and unfortunately, I just missed you. What drew you to teaching?
Unfortunate or fortunate, it depends on the way you look at it.
No, you came back for some lectures, but I never got to have you in class. So I'm curious. I never got to know what you taught there and what drew you to teaching as opposed to jumping in full time with doing writing.
Well, I mean, one reason is that you can't really make a living just jumping in full time writing. Like, there's not really anything to jump into. And also, my undergraduate work was in education, and I had always sort of planned on being a teacher, and I love teaching. So a colleague of mine from undergrad had told me about the job opening at LVPA, and LVPA at that time was a newer school.
Yeah.
So they were looking for people who had like both experience in education and in the performing arts, which is really, if you're looking for like actual formal experience, it's pretty rare. Like, it's easy to say like, I'm a performing artist, whatever that means, and I can teach you how to be a performing artist. Like, not everyone really can do that. So I lucked out in that it was early and I had just graduated and I was really enthusiastic. And so I wound up getting the job there and teaching there for about 3 years.
Wow, it's awesome. And I bring it up because that's my encountering you kind of happened in what I assume. I know that you left. It was the transition for you to from being a teacher to writing full time. Again, is my presumption. I don't know if you had other jobs or left to teach elsewhere. But it's really cool to see that by the time I was in college, your shows were being produced at Lincoln Center. My word.
Yeah.
It's just awesome. Where was that switch for you from teaching full time to being in the business full time?
Really, it was grad school. I mean, I left LVPA in 2008, and I worked at a nonprofit in the Bay Area for a little while. I lived in San Francisco for a few years, and then went back to New York to go to grad school at Julliard. And really, going back to grad school at Julliard is what changed everything, because it's a high profile program, and so the people who get into that program tend to jump onto the radars of people who work in New York theater. And that's truly how that happened.
That's wonderful. What was your first show at Lincoln Center? I know about Loose because that happened around the time that I
Loose was my first show at Lincoln Center, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You did that. And then what took you to the West Coast, into the realm of television?
Really, it was the idea that I could work in TV. I mean, it wasn't something that had occurred to me before I went to grad school. It wasn't something that even occurred to me that there was a path to doing that. And my agent at the time was sort of like, "Do you have any interest in writing television?" And I was like, "Sure, like, why not?" And also, the nice thing about if you're a writer nowadays is that television is sort of a wonderful place to be, because everyone is producing tons of content. Everyone wants to be producing content. And so they're always looking for new writers. And so really it's sort of a no-brainer that if you want to work as a writer, you're going to work in television.
Yeah, and you kind of just answered my question by saying there's the follow-up to that, which was you just said that there's a lot of work for writers. But I was going to ask you if that was a positive or negative thing from a writing standpoint, that you just have so much to choose from that some of it's really good and some of it you wonder how it got on air sometimes. I mean, the quality of the work is fantastic, and you find that the cream rises to the top. So how do you make sure, I guess is the question, is that it's not, there isn't too much out there, if you know what I mean. There's not too much writing and stuff getting out there.
I mean, there is too much, but
but
that's not I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think that we're all lucky enough to be living through probably what is the golden age of television. I mean, in my lifetime, probably some of the best work that's ever been on television has been on television, like The Wire or The Sopranos or 6 Feet Under or Breaking Bad.
Or How to Get Away with Murder.
Or How to Get Away with Murder. I mean, these are all shows that are sort of have challenged the form and have revolutionized the way we think and tell stories and watch television. So, it's all good. I mean, there's too much out there, and I think that's a really good thing. And, it's up to the consumers to pick and choose what they want to sort of spend their time with.
Now, you mentioned changing the form. If there was any one show, and we'll get to your work on Looking and How to Get Away with Murder in a minute, but if there was any one show that sort of made the television industry, certainly the creative side of it, the writing and the production, kind of starch up, what kind of show do you think it was that was the pinnacle and changed it all in terms of quality?
The Sopranos changed everything. I mean, The Sopranos changed the way a TV show could be, the kind of characters you could see on television. Tony Soprano's arguably the first anti-hero to start the anti-hero wave of TV that's followed up by like Walter White and all of these other people. Mm-hmm. It was a crime show, but it was a family show, but it was also operatic and Shakespearean in its scope. And then I think you would say that that's closely followed by The Wire, which is sort of like a novel as a television show. In the way it told the way the stories are told on The Wire, no one else does. So those two shows changed everything. They changed how you could tell it. They changed what television could be, the seriousness with which you approach television, and they influenced certainly my entire generation of TV writers and all storytellers, really. I mean, I don't know anyone who's a writer who wasn't, or director, or an actor who wasn't influenced in some way by The Sopranos. It changed everything.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, and because for me, my guess would be my generation kind of came into the whole Netflix and Hulu thing right as Breaking Bad was kind of hitting it. And then Breaking Bad exploded, and then we're seeing all the television that's coming after it. We're looking back at Breaking Bad and going, you did that. But it's interesting that you point it back to The Sopranos, because without The Sopranos, there would be no Breaking Bad, and without Breaking Bad, everything just evolves. Now, let's talk about, before we get to How to Get Away with Murder, a show that you were involved in called Cooking with HBO. How did you get involved in that show?
Well, I actually had gone to HBO to meet and talk about writing on The Newsroom, which was Aaron Sorkin's show that ran for 3 seasons.
Yes.
And while I was meeting with them, Casey Bloys, who at the time was head of comedy, I think he's since become vice president of television, I think, at HBO. But they had just begun work developing this, at the time, an unnamed show about a group of friends, gay friends who were living in San Francisco. And I'm a gay person. I had lived in San Francisco. I was around the age of the characters on the show. And so, Casey had said to me, listen, you should take a look at this other project. And if it's something that's interesting to you, you should talk about it. And I read the pilot that Michael Lannon had written, and I really liked it. And Andrew Haig, who had at the time done the film Weekend, and he just completed work on a new film called 45 Years, who's a really wonderful visionary storyteller, was attached to executive produce. And I really thought it was an exciting opportunity. And they were gracious enough to give me the opportunity to join their writer's room.
That's wonderful. Are you going back for the special? They're doing something this year.
I worked on the special for a little while. I worked on the screenplay in May. The script is now done. I think they're completely shot. So that should be coming on in a couple of weeks, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I just saw 2016 and pending. I didn't see that it was so close, but that's awesome. And now they had you, that's the first credit I see of yours that's a co-producer credit. Can you explain a little bit about how you got into that side? And producing is one of the most misunderstood roles, I think, in all of the performance arts, from theater to television. What's your role as a co-producer on Looking and How to Get Away with Murder? What that entails?
Well, it's sort of a catch-all phrase. I mean, it's not a really helpful label. I think in the writing side in television, there are just ranks of writers. So like the lowest writer, or I shouldn't say the lowest, but the newest writer in a room is a staff writer. you are promoted from staff writer to story editor. You're promoted from story editor to executive story editor, then to co-producer, then to producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and so on. Those labels really don't mean anything besides how expensive you are to hire. I think on different shows, writers have different roles. Every show has its own culture. On Looking, the writers were really, really intimately involved with being on set and, rewriting scenes on set if they weren't working, rewriting jokes on set if they weren't working. That was on Looking. On How to Get Away with Murder, it's very different. We're on set to sort of like be the representative of the writer's room, and the writer's room speaks with a very unified voice on How to Get Away with Murder. There's a very singularity of vision on How to Get Away with Murder, whereas Looking was a lot more diffuse and fluid. And if you were writing an episode of Looking, you had a lot of ownership over that episode. And How to Get Away with Murder is different than that. So every show has its own culture in terms of how the writers interface with the production side of the material.
Yeah, and that leads me to wonder, because the spring premiere just happened.
Yeah.
And you got sole writer's credit for that. So that was awesome to see, just for me personally. But we had a gentleman on here by the name of Gene Parrott. He was on at the end of last year, and he talked about that he would go home if he got writer's credit. It was him at a typewriter, and then he did older stuff at a typewriter, and they would go in, they would make revisions, and it really wasn't a room. It was you'd go home and then bring it in. And you talk about working in the room. How is it decided on these dramas that seem to be so collaborative? Who gets the sole credit at the front end for who wrote the episode?
Again, it really just depends on the show. I mean, our show, we try to make sure everybody gets to eat. So, when you're credited as a writer on a show, you get a script fee for that. So you're paid for that work. It's not a meaningless thing. And so on our show, we try to make sure everyone gets even script credits so that everyone's paid and compensated equally. Because it is a very collaborative process. We do work in the room. We do rewriting in the room. We're all working together constantly. That's not how every show works, though. I worked for a little while. I worked on another HBO show called Girls, and on Girls, that show is about Lena Dunham, and that show is about her voice. And so it wouldn't make sense for someone to go off for 3 weeks or 4 weeks and come back with a script, because that's not what that show's about. That show's about Lena's voice. So, it makes sense that she writes a lot of those episodes and directs a lot of those episodes and goes off and writes whatever she wants to write, because that's the process of that show. It really just depends on the show. And for me, the credit is, it's nice. And it does mean that you have more influence over that episode on How to Get Away with Murder. It does mean that you're steering the ship in the writer's room when that episode is being broken. But it doesn't mean that every single word that comes out of the mouth of the character is a word that you put down on the page. But in a lot of ways, that's really the last step of the process, and it's the least important.
Right, and that's interesting. So, what is the process? Can we dive in? What is the process of writing an episode of How to Get Away with Murder?
Well, it's a tricky thing. I mean, it depends on where you are in the season. So, if you're at the beginning of the season, you have a lot of space to play with what happens and how it happens. And on How to Get Away with Murder, we tend to start with, where is Annalise Keating's brain that week? So, in my episode, which was the mid-season premiere, she had just been shot in the previous episode. Yeah. And so you're kind of, that's what you're going to deal with. She's dealing with the fact that she'd just been shot, and there are all these problems that have arisen out of the stunt that she pulls in the mid-season finale. And so whatever the story is going to be, it's got to be that. Because of the amount of space that took up, we didn't elect to do a case of the week, which generally on our show there's a procedural element on our show, which is that there's a case of the week. Annalise has to deal with whatever her case is that her law practice is sort of wrestling with.
Yeah.
And then, her students also have their own stories. And so it's a matter of sort of negotiating what the balance is. How much real estate is Annalise's story going to take up? How much real estate is the case of the week going to take up? And then you have 6 acts on an ABC show. And so after every act, there's a commercial. And so you have to sort of come up with what are the big moments that are going to lead us into a commercial that are going to grab the viewer and make them want to come back after the commercial break.
Yeah. Wow. It's so fascinating to me. And I'm just curious, what are some of the challenges within that process? It could be a challenge or there might be some benefits to it. I don't know. So explore both these sides with this question. The benefits and challenges of only having 15 episodes a season as opposed to the regular 21 or 22.
Mm-hmm. For me, 15 episodes is a blessing.
Really?
I think that our show would not work if there were more than 15 episodes. It's just the amount of story that our show consumes in one episode would make coming up with good story for more than 15 nearly impossible. I think we just manage at 15 to make a season work. And for some people, it doesn't. But I think, having like even 18, I think one of my best friends works on Empire.
Yeah.
And they have 18 episodes. And I think they really struggle with having 18 episodes because their show is like our show in that it consumes story so quickly. Everyone is like, what's the big aha moment? What's the big twist moment? And when you're operating in that kind of a pressure cooker, there's only so many things you can do. I mean, someone gets killed, someone gets arrested. There's not really a lot of places you can go to shock viewers, especially nowadays because viewers are really smart.
Yeah.
So having 15 episodes, I think, is really the best we can do. I think if we had 10 to 12, our show would be arguably I think our show would be wonderful and would work at a really wonderful pace if we had 10 to 12 episodes, but that's never going to happen. So,
well, it makes it more potent from a viewer standpoint. I know nothing about the writing. It makes it more. It hits you in the gut more when you have less time, and it tightens it up, and it just, like you said, it consumes stories so quickly, but it makes it, no episode lulls. Every episode something important happens, and it just right. Hits you one after the other, and it's a fantastic show. And in England they do 6 or 8 and they're done, but then they leave people starving for a year and a half before they bring anything back. Yeah.
I mean, I think though that their model is so much healthier from an artistic standpoint because there's no mandate for how many episodes they do. It sort of is left to the creators of the show. Like, do you want to do 4? Do you want to do 6? Like a show like Sherlock,
yeah,
which makes 3 1-hour or 2-hour or hour and a half things, and they're brilliant. Yeah. But it's because they don't have the pressure to come up with 10. If they had to come up with 10, that would be a much harder show to do. And I think that, when you have a show like, I'm watching this show now, London Spy with Ben Whishaw, which is fantastic. And it's these, each one is an hour long. And I don't know how many they're doing, but it's a great show because they're not trying to stretch a story out to fit an episode order. They're telling the stories they need in the episodes that they need. So it's a healthier model from an artistic standpoint. Now, of course, they don't make money. You know what I mean? They make some money, but they're not making money for the network the way that How to Get Away with Murder makes money for ABC. So that's the challenge. It's we're all well paid because ABC gets 15 episodes. We'd be better paid if ABC got 22 episodes, and they'd love to get 22, but they're not going to.
Yeah, and what was the decision? Was it Viola Davis's saying I don't want to do more than 15? Was it a writer's decision, or was it a production decision that said we're sticking with 15?
It's Viola Davis. Viola Davis said she only wanted to do 15 episodes. She wanted to have time to spend with her family. She wanted to have time to do other projects. So we all owe Viola Davis or you could blame Viola Davis if you want more than 15.
ABC blames Viola Davis, youth anchor. That's because they won 22. Yeah, no, it's so fascinating to me. And I can tell that you have really fallen in love with working in this medium. And we talked about your theater beginning. So I'm going to ask a tough question. Can you recall a moment where you fell in love with working in this medium when you made the switch?
In television?
Yes, when you made the switch.
Oh, there are several. I mean, I love working in all mediums. I mean, I enjoy working in features. I enjoy working in television. I enjoy working in theater. And I'm lucky enough to have a career that lets me do all three right now. And each one is good for different reasons. I mean, I like the nice thing about working in television is how collaborative it is, how reliable the schedule is, like you're going into an office from 10 to 6 and that's great, or, sometimes later, but it's nice to have that kind of reliability. It's not something that you find often as a writer. Writing is it ebbs and flows, and it really depends on what's in the ether of the culture that day. Whereas working in television, it's a job, and it's comforting to have that kind of a job. And it's also, you're sitting in a room with other writers for like 8 hours a day, and I really enjoy other writers. So I like being around writers. And I like working with actors, and I like working with directors. So it lets me play in a lot of different sandboxes.
Yeah, wonderful. Last two questions about television, and then we gotta get something else on record from the LVPA days. But last two questions from writing, from a writing standpoint. Any advice to people that want to become writers, that maybe want to try to get into the Julliard program, or want to just put their nose to the grindstone and figure it out?
I mean, if you want to get into Julliard, apply to go to Julliard. You need I think really all you need is a play. A really good friend of mine got into Julliard from writing a 10-minute play.
Wow.
I mean, that's never happened before, but or since. But they at Julliard, all they care about is the writing. Is the writing good? They don't care about your age. They don't care about where you come from. All they care about is the writing good, and is this person going to fit into the other people that we're picking for the program? They build a writer's room at Julliard, so that's all they care about. So if you want to go to Julliard, apply to go to Julliard is what I'd say. In terms of being a writer, I think you just have to keep writing. Mm-hmm. If you want to work in TV, I guess come to LA and learn the business. Like start as a production assistant and work your way through the ranks and figure it out. There's no one path. There's no one way. I happen to be very lucky because I happened to work at a time when people really wanted playwrights to work in television. So I got a chance to come out and work in TV. And then there was a project looking that happened to really fit who I was and the kinds of stories I tell. That's not always going to be the case. So it's a tricky thing, and there's no one right way to do it. I think you just have to keep writing so that you become a better writer, and you just can talk about your work in a coherent, articulate way.
That's incredible.
Because that's really what helps out here.
Absolutely. And yeah, it makes sense. And you got to follow your own path, and you got to fight for your work and just keep at it. Now, the last question I have, because I have to ask this because I'm a fan of the show. I know our listeners are a fan. Can you tease anything upcoming with How to Get Away with Murder? Is there anything you can tease for us?
Yeah, some really crazy shit.
I would hope.
That's all I can say.
That's great. Now, all right, all you regular listeners, please, this is where this ends for you, but for the 40 or so people that listen from home, this has to get on record because I know it'll crack Morris up. Why did you throw a shoe at Chris Morris while you guys were working on a play? He told this story in high school, and I want to get your side of it on record to crack him up.
Okay. I was directing a production of American Buffalo.
Yeah.
And Chris was playing Bobby. I think that's the name of the sort of like drug-addled boy character who sort of runs errands for the two other guys who own the junk shop. And Chris had this thing. I mean, when he was a young actor, he just had this thing where he was very like, I'm from New Jersey and I'm very pretty. And so when I stand on stage, I kind of like pose like an Abercrombie model. And I don't think he like intentionally was doing it at all. I think it was just like, this is the way I've been trained to like stand in a space.
Yeah.
And I remember we were directing and he was like leaning up against, or I was directing, I should say. And he was leaning up against the window and I stopped him and I was like, Chris, what the f*** standing here? And I was like, no, you're like posing. And he was like, no, I'm just standing here. And I was like, all right, like, fine. Can you not stand like that? Because you look stupid. And so he was like, fine, okay. Kind of got like an attitude with me.
Yeah.
And then we go back into the scene and he literally just goes exactly into the same exact pose. And I was like, what the f-? You know, and again, this is something you should not do if you're directing professionally, but I wasn't directing professionally.
Yeah.
I literally just took my shoe off and I threw it at him. Because I was like, what the f*** like that? If you ever stand like that again, I'm just going to keep throwing my shoe at you.
That's great.
Again, not something you should really do professionally or ever to anyone, but
It's
it got him to
college.
stop standing that way, so I guess my job is done.
That was the follow-up. It did work. Well, that's a wonderful, funny story to end this on. This was fantastic, and I hope you'll come back again if you work on another show or as How to Get Away with Murder continues. This was a blast, and I know there's so much more we could have covered today, and thank you so much. And as a former almost student, but I know you lectured a couple of times, and as someone who has followed your career, I am so, so proud of your success. The episode was excellent, and I can't wait to see more from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. I know I only had him in a couple of lectures, but I cannot call any teacher at all by their first name. I have some teachers that are now friends. I can't do it. It just feels too weird. I hope you'll come back, Mr. Lee, in the future, as I know you are going to do even more killer work in TV and theater. This is just such a cool trajectory, awesome career path. I love seeing when your name crops up in the opening and closing credits. That's it for us this week. Thank you again to our season sponsors, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. You heard about them at the top of the show. Stay tuned to talkfor2.com as well as on Twitter and Facebook for more from the #1 performing arts podcast. Reach out by emailing talkfor2cast@gmail.com and talk about us on social media using hashtag talkfor2. From our site, you can go to our brand new Amazon guest shop and see some of my favorite projects from our guests. Movies, books, and more have been handpicked by yours truly so that you can get to know their work. I'll be getting as many former guests' material as I can, so check back often. I'm always putting some new stuff on there. Signing off for Talk for Two, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding everyone out there to keep talking for two.
You can hear more show business interviews with the stars at talkfor2.com, where you'll also find one-of-a-kind products to improve your own show. That's talk, the number 4, TWO.com.